Hello, and welcome to another episode of eDiscovery Chicks, the podcast about all things eDiscovery and legal tech, hosted by two gals who are having a Monday of it today. Anyways, we're your hosts. That's Bree.
And that's Angie. What do you mean you're having a Monday today?
The number of things I've spilled, tripped over, or otherwise fucked up in some way,
Oh, man.
very Monday.
Well, we're coming straight out of the box with the F word. That means it's a Monday. All right. Well, today in this episode, we will be talking about data mapping. We do have a famous guest, aka a diva, hint, hint, who's known for her expertise in data privacy. So let me introduce you to Debbie Reynolds. Debbie Reynolds, founder, CEO, and Chief Data Privacy Officer of Debbie Reynolds Consulting LLC, is a globally recognized data privacy and emerging technology advisor. Ranked as one of the global top 8 data privacy experts and top 30 cyber risk communicator, Debbie is known for helping business leaders reduce exposure, protect what they have built, and capture new opportunities through smarter data strategy. With more than 20 years of experience, she has advised global executives, boards, and legal teams on solving high stakes data problems that impact revenue, trust, and decision velocity. Debbie has delivered keynotes for organizations including TikTok, Johnson & Johnson, Coca-Cola, PayPal, Uber, and S&P Global. Her leadership extends to international governance. She serves as chair of the IEEE Global Committee on Cybersecurity for Next Generation Connectivity Systems and previously served on the U.S. Department of Commerce Internet of Things Advisory Board. Debbie's insights have been featured in major outlets such as the New York Times, Forbes, Bloomberg, and Digiday. She also hosts the award-winning #1 global privacy podcast, The Data Diva Talks Privacy, reaching audiences in over 130 countries. Ooh, welcome, Debbie. I can't believe that you're taking the time to join us.
Oh, it was such a pleasure. I'm so happy that you reached out, and I love to geek out about data. So this is fun for me. Well, thank you for that introduction. That's amazing.
Sure, your background is so impressive, and I know I'm excited that you're here today and excited for our listeners to get to glean from your expertise.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excited
Thank you
too.
so much for joining us, Debbie.
My pleasure.
So, Debbie, we love to do icebreakers with our guests on the pod. So, if you're game, here's today's. As somebody who literally thinks about data privacy for a living, do you think that you are the most paranoid person at your family's dinner table, or have you just accepted that the toaster is watching you?
No, I'm definitely the most paranoid. So I'm totally tinfoil hat, and people don't pay any attention to me at all. So now I'm relegated to, almost like the kids' table at family events. And so what I try to do whenever I go to an event, I try to find one tidbit that I can leave people with. Like, don't, those the text that you get about told things, don't click on that, stuff like that. So yeah, I'm totally
Oh
tinfoil
my
hat,
Oh
gosh.
my
absolutely.
God. Those are the worst. Okay, can you tinfoil hat something for me? So I have, and talk about on the
Yeah.
podcast frequently, my Aura ring, my little wearable. Give me your tinfoil hat impression of the data that this little thingy is collecting from my body.
Yeah. Well, organizations really want to know your location. So they want to know your location. They want to know what you're doing, and in order for them to know your precise location, they would need at least two devices that you had. And so your phone or your ring are things that maybe before you had the ring, they could probably tell, in general where you were. But with whatever device, that other second device you have and is connected to your phone, then they know like almost the precise location. So some people are creeped out about that. Maybe that's a good thing depending on what you want to do with that data. But, you know, for me, it's like you have to weigh the pros and the cons in terms of what the benefit is versus the risk. So I don't tell people like don't ever get on Facebook or don't do this or whatever. I'm like, does the value you get outweigh the potential risk? And for some people that's fine. And for me, because I'm an educator, I just want to tell people, here are the risks, here are the benefits. You have to decide for yourself, as opposed to me saying, don't do this or don't do that. Because I feel like people are going to do what they're going to do, and they have to figure out what makes the most sense for them to do or not.
So if I'm going to go on a crime spree, I should probably take my Aura ring off.
Totally.
Now we know about Angie and her crime spree. She'll leave her Aura ring at home, which totally
Yeah.
creeps me out, by the way. And I'm not going to be having an Aura ring, but whatever.
It's great if you just want a little dose of shame about how poorly you've slept every day. But okay, so moving away from advice on how to more effectively commit crimes, Debbie, you've been in this space for like 20 years. So can you take us back? How did somebody who started in litigation technology and eDiscovery end up becoming such a global voice on data privacy? What was your path to get from A to B?
Yeah, great question. Well, first of all, my technology career started in library science. So, back in the day when libraries had card catalogs, I was helping them turn those into databases. And because I did that work, people who were in the legal field started contacting me about doing legal stuff. So, I've always been a wacky data person. You may know me from legal, but I'm known in a lot of different industries because people come to me with all types of strange things. But what happened to me, I was working with a lot of firms. I was building teams and businesses for companies that were wanting to do electronic discovery. And around 2014 or so, some people who knew me from that work started to call me up, and they were like, hey, we know that you know about data privacy, because I would talk at conferences about that. And so the first company that contacted me was McDonald's Corporation. And this is before the European Union started changing a lot of their laws. And they were like, well, why don't you come talk to our corporate legal department about privacy? And I was like, okay. So, I went to, back then they were in Oak Brook, Illinois, and literally I was in the Big Mac conference room talking to their whole legal department about privacy. And I felt like Paul Revere back then, because I was like, the British are coming, the British are coming, right? Because no one in the US is talking about this. No one was really thinking about it. I was talking about the extraterritorial reach of data privacy. And so they were kind of blown away because, lawyers are very about jurisdiction and stuff. So it's changed a lot. And so I talked about that because a lot of people weren't talking about it. And then 2 years later, PBS asked me to be on television to talk about privacy and why this law in Europe is going to impact the US. And so that was kind of the start of it. And I thought, well, so many people ask me about this. Maybe I should do this as a business. So that's what happened.
I mean, you certainly didn't start small. McDonald's and PBS, like that's pretty big. So kudos to you.
Oh my gosh. Yes, it was a eye-opening. So I enjoy it. I enjoy it.
Well, you've built one of the most recognizable personal brands in the industry. When you first started, was Diva or Data Diva something that you had in your mind? Was that an intentional thing that you did? Or how did that find you?
Well, this is a great story. So I had gone to a networking event. A friend of mine who's is she still, yeah, she's general counsel at Fannie Mae. She's a friend of mine. And she had said, hey, I need you, there's this cool group that I work with, and they're having a meeting in Chicago. You should go meet these people. And so it was a bunch of executive women, and we were talking about branding and stuff like that. And so um a lady there was from the Wall Street Journal, and we did our little elevator speech introducing each other to one another. And she said, I introduced myself, and she said, oh, you're like the data diva. And we just laughed about it at first. And then I thought, wow, that's really interesting. And this lady from the ARP, she was like, you should totally use that. You should totally use that. So, like, for me, growing up, I was always the kid who never had a nickname. So for me, I was like, oh crap, I get to get a nickname finally, finally. So at first I was kind of bashful about it, and I kind of snuck it on LinkedIn, and people would call me, oh my God, I love that. I love that. So I decided to continue to use it.
I love that name. It's so memorable. And like Brie and I have talked about that. Our branding is like feminine coded, feminine specific. And we're like, should we do something a little bit more neutral? And then we're like, nah, man, we're gonna own this. And I feel like you've got this similar vibe of like, yeah, no, I'm woman, hear me roar. I'm an expert in this space.
Oh, totally. It's fun for me. It's fun for me because I've never had a nickname. So I relish it totally.
Well, now you've got a great one. Well, so let me ask you this. Why I know that you're just like so passionate about your work and it comes through every time you speak about it. Can you talk to our listeners a little bit about like why do you feel so passionately about data privacy?
Yeah. My interest in it started probably around 1995. My mother had a book that she had read and she had purchased called The Right to Privacy, and Caroline Kennedy was the co-author of that book, and it was really about privacy in the U.S. and how is articulated in our laws. And so for me, I thought in the U.S., we're the land of the free, the home of the brave, and so privacy must be in there. We talk about all these freedoms we have. And so that book was really about how privacy isn't in the Constitution and how it plays itself out in the legal area. And so that piqued my personal interest in privacy. Even before this is before, the commercial internet, even. And so as technology started to grow more in digital, I started to see a lot of the gaps and the cracks that were happening. I was like, oh wow, if someone uses someone data's like this, then that would, harm them in some other way. And so for me it was more personal. I'm like, well, what are my rights? Like what do I do? What do I need to be thinking about? So as I started asking those questions, I started asking those questions at a bigger level for organizations. What does it mean for an organization to handle people's data, or what does it mean for the person? How do they react to a company? So for me, I talk about it in terms of not just trust. I think trust is important, but then also revenue, right? So we're seeing companies like, let's say, 23andMe. So 23andMe had a breach and they tried to blame the consumers and they were like all pissed off. And so a lot of the people who were their customers went away, and that, their stock price went down. They became bankrupt. And so these are some of the things that companies need to really be thinking about in terms of how they're handling people's data. And I think a lot of companies, they think, okay, as long as I give someone a product or a service, I don't have to be a good steward, or I don't have to be transparent about how I handle people's data. But really, it is becoming more of a bottom line issue for companies. And that's why I'm so passionate about it. So I want companies to succeed in doing business, but I also want them to do it in a way that doesn't harm people.
I think it's really interesting how the issue of or the topic of privacy, it really is it starts from a personal level for many of us. And I'm the very opposite of you, Debbie. When I was, especially back in those days that you're talking about, Dewey Decimal System and card catalogs, which I don't even know if some of our listeners even know what that is. But back in those days, I didn't think about privacy. It wasn't a thing that was a concern to me. And now, I've always been, look, I am who I am. I have nothing to hide. Like, I'm not worried about my privacy, but I had to start thinking about it from a corporate standpoint because of the laws, the regulations. So it became something I educated myself on. And now I do feel a little bit more conservative about privacy and what I'm sharing and what's out there because I've educated myself. But it's interesting to hear that you kind of started from the polar opposite place, which I would call you a trailblazer. I mean, honestly, because people back in those days weren't really, that wasn't a popular thought process. So it's really cool to see you blaze a trail and educate the rest of us so that we can not be dumb like me. Be like, I don't know, just put it all out there. It'll be fine. Because it's not all fine. But something that I think is fascinating too, and I think this also I would attribute to you being a trailblazer, is that you have overlapped or intersected many different disciplines and legal technology and other forms of technology and data. And it's something that Angie and I talk a lot about on the podcast is cross collaboration and how we're no longer in siloed mindsets anymore as people or as organizations. And more often than not, people are wanting to work together and learn from each other. So I'm curious from your perspective, why do you think it's important that folks consider the holistic perspective of all the different departments and disciplines in an organization, for example, and all the different aspects of legal technology or just technology and data in general?
That's a great question. Well, let's take, for example, relativity. So let's say you know relativity because you work in eDiscovery. But what is relativity actually? It's a software program. what is it made of? Like the back end of those programs, regardless of what tool you're using, a lot of the tools you're using are built on kind of the same technology. So relativity is a purpose built tool for discovery, right? So people who work in data, like you and me, we can take those skills that we learn about working with data and transfer it to other things because these other things are built on similar foundations. For me, I think about data as like the center of a wheel. And if you understand data and data flows in the way that different industries use it different ways, but I think at the core of it, people want to get work done, right? And so all you're trying to do is coax a result out of a tool. So if you think of it that way, it helps you be more marketable, I think, because you can translate the work that you've done in one area to another area. So one example I give to people in eDiscovery, let's say eDiscovery, we care about, like lawyers care about privilege, right? So what's privilege? Privilege is stuff that you don't want to give to the other person. It's something that you need to protect in a special way. When you think about privacy, that's all that you're doing. You're saying this data about someone needs to be protected in a special way. So thinking about data in those ways will help you be able to bridge that gap and be able to talk to people in different other areas around data and really be able to leverage your data knowledge in those ways.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I want to pivot to a slightly different topic here, and because you briefly touched on this, but now we're going to dig in. And that is data mapping, because I often think this is one of the most underappreciated topics in both privacy and e-discovery worlds. And so, for our listeners who may hear that term, maybe like used differently depending on who's talking, maybe they've never even heard that term before. Can you tell our listeners, like, what is a data map and what should it actually contain?
So, a data map in a broad sense is really you being able to show or tell a story about how data flows through your organization. When different disciplines, let's say e-discovery, when you think about a data map in e-discovery, it's typically because, let's say, there's a litigation or anticipation of a litigation or some type of investigation, and you need to find data that's relevant to the case that you're looking for. But in order to do that, you may need to really dig in with the organization to find out where that data lives. In a privacy thing, you're doing a similar thing, but it's not based on litigation a lot of times. A lot of times it's based on maybe a regulation or maybe they're a third party to some other company and the other company's like, hey, we want you to align with this regulation or do this with your data. And so they have to be able to look at what they have and be able to report back how they manage data. And then if they get into problems, what is their plan basically? So for me, when I think about data mapping, I've always thought of it more of a holistic way. So for me, I never went in and said, oh, well, what are the custodians? Like I never did that. I'm like, so what's your operating system? How do you get email? Like back then we didn't have Slack, but what other ways are you using to communicate within the organization? And once I get that picture, then I can drill down into custodians and what other people are doing. Because a lot of times what I find out is if I start at the operating system and the other ways that people communicate, then as I'm going down to the custodian level, I'll start to see the inconsistencies. So someone says, well, we use Microsoft 365 at our organization level. Okay. So I get down the custodian level, someone said, oh, I started sending emails on my Mac. Okay. So where did the Mac come? So that being able to have that higher level view of a company first before you drill down really helps you understand where things are, where gaps are. And a lot of times, it's so funny because I will talk to the legal team. A lot of times, especially in the litigation, legal teams they may be reporting back to a judge or a regulator, and like, oh, we have nothing for this. And I talked to the tech people, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, we got a ton of that." And it's like, "Wait a minute now." It's like, we need to get on the same page about what it is you're talking about. So for me, doing a data map at a holistic level means that companies can use that or reuse it in the future for other things. So for me, I was never the one to be like, oh, you just need a data map for this one litigation, right? So, or you need a data map just for this law. So you need to map your whole organization. It doesn't have to be like an excruciating, extremely detailed thing. We just need to know like, the high level basics of things. And so if we need to go back, there may be situations where we need to drill down into something, but really to me, a data map should be like a living document within your organization. So let's say you bring on a new tool. How does that impact the data map? So you're handling data in a different way, or oh, we retired that backup program and then we started this and this at this date. Like that's another thing I ask people data mapping. I'm like, so have you had any like major upgrades? Have you had any data breaches or anything like that? Because that may change really how you're handling data, where data lives.
Well, and you kind of hit home on some things I know I've experienced, and so has Angie in our corporate background, which is everybody seems to, or originally anyway, in the olden days, people were seeming to want to keep a data map for different reasons. Maybe the privacy team needed one for they would need to know where all the PII was or where the jurisdictions were, where data was stored. And then legal needed to have a data map for legal purposes. And then IT needed to have a data map for, change management, sunsetting applications and attesting to what's where and how and all that thing. I'm curious today, as you are working with different organizations, how you help keep these different groups of people aligned so that they're all working together and not necessarily against each other, and also being able to leverage the information that each other has and including that in a data map. Like, how are you able to work your magic to make that happen?
Well, first of all, one thing I ask people before I even start, so don't start a data map before you ask people, do you have a data map or who has a data map? Someone may say, well, somebody in IT may have something or whatever. So you want to have something to start with. You don't want to have to recreate something that's already created. You know what I'm saying? So, or you want to see where they started because like you say, maybe the privacy team has something, maybe IT has something. If they have anything, definitely look at it, definitely ask questions, definitely update it. That could be like a good foundation for you to move forward. But then also, you want to make sure that the work, or at least I do, want to make sure that the work can be used again. So I completely advocate for more of the higher level things about, OS. Here are here's how we handle email. Here's how we handle that. Also, like looking at what their data retention practices are. I was gonna say policy, quote unquote. I'm doing air quotes because
I think those air quotes are very warranted.
yes, right, right. Because I mean, a lot of times people they give me paper about, oh, we do this, we do that, we do that. And I'm like, well, do you actually do that? Like, if your walk doesn't match your talk, you're not going to be in alignment, right? So you can't just go with what's on paper. You have to actually ask people, okay, is this right? Is this accurate? Is this true? Is this current? Do we need to change something? And a lot of times when you have people, especially in organizations a lot of times are like Santa's workshop, where everyone's working on their little toy, every little part of the process. And so they don't know what the other teams are doing. So in litigation and also privacy, you get a chance to have more of a global view of an organization and what they're doing, and you get to talk to those other groups, right? Because a lot of times they don't have different understandings, or they don't know. Oh, I pulled this lever over here, and it changed something over there. So being able to have those conversations, or even understanding what they need to be thinking about is really important. So one example I would give is like once you have, let's say, a company's been sued, they have to stop deleting stuff, right? And so some people are like, okay, well, maybe the legal team, they sent out something, so, okay, stop deleting stuff. And they may assume that everybody who got that message know what that means, right? So maybe the IT person doesn't understand that that means that they need to stop like automated processes on a particular set of data, right? And I've seen this happen a billion times where they're like,
I was
okay,
gonna
yeah, we
say,
sent out the hold and we told everybody to do this, but they didn't know what to do, right? they didn't even know what they were dealing with. So a lot of times you're there as that communication layer or trying to make sure, okay, when you say don't do this, the IT people are still deleting stuff. So how do we get that communication together so that we're all on the same page?
I mean, yeah, literally, how many emails do you get a day where you're like, okay, and you sort of read it and you're like, ugh, I just don't want to. So many. Okay, so I want to talk about something like this came up when I was in house and we were trying to create a data map, but it turns out it's not really a one time project because all the things you just said, right? Like data moves, systems are deprecated, like people onboard new software, people leave, like all kinds of reasons. So, what's your advice to organizations that keep a data map who want to keep it current and accurate rather than kind of like letting it become obsolete the moment it's quote unquote finished? And like, what
Yeah.
format do you recommend? I mean, do spreadsheets still work? Are we looking at an AI solution? Somewhere in between?
That was a good question. There was a quote someone said once, like a fool blames his tools or something like that. Don't
I
get
like
all
that.
yeah, don't get all wrapped up in the tool. Like literally, if it's a sheet of paper and you're writing down, okay, this server is here and it does email. This server is here and it does this. I guess the thing that people get in trouble with, they either sketch something out that's not detailed enough or it's too detailed. Like I've seen people go like extremely way too detailed, right? The idea is when data hits your organization, where did it come from and where is it going? And how can you trace that path of where things go? So think about data in terms of life cycle from great cradle to grave. And it's going into these different paths. So when you add a new application, it's going into this new path. Maybe you, like you say, you deprecated or you decommissioned something. So that data path is like, let's say that's the end of life path, unless it's being like migrated to something else. Or a lot of times people they're put in a back room somewhere and forget about it. Like they're like, okay, John knew, like, where's John? John retired or something. Like John knew where this thing was, back room. So, I think someone at a high level needs to own it and it can't be something that's like just a checkbox for someone. So it really needs to live more at a higher level within the organization. But I think, again, every time that you're at a new application or there's a new litigation, that's an opportunity to update, or maybe that's a trigger that people can use to see, okay, this is where we are, this is where we thought we were 6 months ago. Is this accurate? Is this true? Then how can we improve on what we already have?
And I know all of what you're saying came into my world when I started learning about other groups of people at my organization who were trying and to keep data maps and create data maps. And I was secretly super stoked because it solved a problem from an eDiscovery perspective that I was constantly trying to solve, which is where the heck is my data in the first place? Because how am I supposed to be responsible for finding potentially responsive information if I don't actually know where all of my data exists? And not only that, what's contained on these different systems. And so a data map was like a magic tool. Like all of a sudden, I'm like, whoa, somebody has already asked these questions. This is amazing. But what are some other considerations that you might want to share with our listeners that they might want to think of from an e-discovery standpoint when it comes to data maps?
Yeah. I think a lot of companies, just in general, have not been good at deciding what to do with data at the end of a data life cycle. So, because of that, a lot of times you have situations where, like I was saying, oh my God, there are these computers in the back room that we forgot about. And it's like, okay, John knew about that, but John's retired now. And John's the only person who knew about that. But now we're in trouble because now we have all this new responsible stuff we have to look at. So thinking about end of life is very important now, especially from a privacy perspective, because what privacy is doing that had never been done before is that it is forcing companies to get rid of things or delete things or take some extra
Hmm.
action with something that they never had to do before. So we know what this is like, right? So it's like, oh, we're running out of space on the server. And the answer was like, oh, buy another server, instead of like, oh my God, we need to get rid of stuff. So thinking about that end of life because the data within your company that has the lowest business value can have some of the highest risk in terms of privacy or cyber. So we see this happen over and over again. Let's say your company is breached, and let's say you had a case. A case was over with. The data, it just never got deleted. It had maybe personal information in it. It gets breached or something. And then now you're in trouble with a regulator, and then they want to count how many people are impacted, right? And you're thinking, "Oh my god, if we had just deleted this stuff, then we wouldn't be in trouble." Like cuz we didn't need it.
Mhm.
We had no one's looked at like you have stuff like, "Oh, no one's looked at this for 10 years," or, "Why do we still have it?" So, thinking about that end of life, I think is really important. And then not only for that, but, like, I've experienced situations where, I was always the end of life data person. I'm like, "Can we get rid of this? We don't need this anymore." There was a situation where a firm they were served a third party subpoena to give some data. And because we had gone through this life cycle, we had deleted it and we had done the certificate of destruction and everything. So literally, we gave the GC the certificate of destruction. They could have done like a somersault, right? So let's say there's so much money because they didn't have to do this legal process. They could say, "Hey, we 6 months ago, because the case was over, we got rid of this data." So those are all things that I think companies need to be thinking about.
Absolutely. I mean, I think if you're listening and you haven't thought of that, you just were handed some golden words of advice. Because not only is it time consuming and costs money to produce data and have it reviewed, but you could also have some little hidden landmines in that data that you don't really want to produce in the first place. So, and if you think about it, if you've got data that's been sitting around since like 15 years ago, 20 years ago, HR rules have changed and the way people are have changed. And some of that data you really don't want to bring up. It's better that it's back in the closet and lit on fire where it belongs. Great advice. And speaking of technology and changing and us progressing as an industry and as a society, AI comes into mind. It's something we talk about a lot, maybe like at nauseum in eDiscovery. Just thinking about all of these new possibilities of the types of data that are out there, how employees are using AI tools, shadow AI, how we're using AI tools in eDiscovery. I'm wondering, how does AI and the introduction of specifically agentic AI and some of these other AI tools and chatbots and things like this, how does that now change the world of the data map? What is the impact there?
Well, I think it's going to have a huge impact. Part of the reason is that a lot of times people think about data in a static fashion. So when you think about a map, you're like, okay, server A, server B, server C. And so this is where this data lives. But data doesn't just live in a place, it moves from one place to the next. So part of it is understanding the flow. Like how does stuff move around or who is moving stuff around? And so I think that data maps need to evolve to understand what that data life is. So data is like water and it goes within organizations. And we know a lot of times data gets lost or people lose control over it, or, it gets duplicated, it gets moved around, it gets, put into these different funnels. And so I think companies need to be better at understanding, not that they need to understand the guts of an AI system, right? They're going to ultimately be responsible for what goes into those systems and what comes out. So thinking about, what am I putting in to these systems? I guess the way I can describe it, let's say eDiscovery. So when you think of eDiscovery, the way eDiscovery was is like, okay, we had this funnel that was big at the top and it gets smaller, right? So I dump everything in the funnel and it gets smaller at the bottom. And AI is the opposite. So the funnel should be small at the top and then it gets big at the bottom. Instead of garbage in, garbage out, it's garbage in, junkyard out. So you're going to get more junk If you put bad stuff in, you're gonna get like way more bad stuff, at the end. So being able to have more curation and more thought about what goes in will help you a lot down the line. But then understanding that the data should have a life cycle from cradle to grave. So thinking about, where does the data start and how does it flow through the organization? So that lineage has not been something that we had not looked at within organizations. The lineage is going to become very important in the AI age. So that's the way we need to be thinking about data mapping in the future. So not just data in static places, but data that flows into different places.
I love that. Garbage in, junkyard out. It's so true. Like you ask AI a single question and it's like,
Yeah,
there's a ton
totally.
of junk. I mean, to all of your points, like for eDiscovery practitioners who are evaluating all of these AI assisted review tools, what data mapping should they be bringing? Like, what data mapping questions should they be bringing to their vendors? And specifically around where custodian data goes, how it's used to train models, and like privacy obligations that use may trigger.
That's a very complex question. It has
It's
a
a
lot of
loaded
different
question.
levels, of course. I would say part of in the litigation stuff in terms of personal data, you really want to make sure, in my view, I've always recommended that companies separate data of people who are not in the US, people who are. So, like maybe the US folks, because our laws are different, right, about privacy, and the people who aren't in the US. So, having like the foreign folks and their data, because there may be like for example, for a US person, you may have to do just a typical litigation hold, right? But then let's say you had a data person in Europe, in the EU. So you could do a whole, but then you may have to give them more information, right? Because they have different rights than we have. Or let's say an employee who's in California may have different rights than people in other states. So thinking about trying to come up with a workflow that doesn't slow you down so much. So maybe doing like I recommend, like I do a chapter in a book called eDiscovery for Corporate Counsel. I think I've been doing it for over 10 years now. Anyway, I was like the first person who introduced the privacy chapter in that book. But one of the things that I said that I always recommend is that if you have, you should have a separate, maybe parallel path for people who are in the US versus people who aren't in the US because they may need some type of special handling. And you may be able to produce US people's stuff faster because they don't have as many rights as people in other countries. So yeah, that's what I
Oh,
totally think.
hooray.
Yeah.
Love that for us.
Yeah. Well, and you kind of brought up the regulations and in terms of, different jurisdictions and different places in the world have different regulations out there, as we likely all know who are listening to this podcast. But, we've seen more recently that domestically we are seeing some changes. So, like, for example, I was in Minneapolis last week and we were talking about privacy regulations there in Minnesota because they have a regulation that's a little bit different in the sense that it is asking or requiring companies to basically have a data map, have a data inventory for the first time in some of our domestic regulations.
Wait,
And
seriously?
yeah, and so
That's
our
so fun.
our clients there were like, "What the heck?" And there's, I mean, to their credit, there's not really a lot of detail about what does that mean. Well, you say we need to have this inventory, like what kind of inventory, and like what needs to be inventoried, and whose inventory, and how, and what. I mean, so everybody's got all these questions about it. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, Debbie, are organizations taking this more seriously now because they're kind of seeing it infiltrate domestically and that they're going to be their feet are going to be held to the flame a little bit? And how are they going about interpreting these regulations?
Yeah, great questions. Well, you were the first person to tell me about the data map thing. That's really interesting. In Minnesota, what I'm seeing is forcing companies to have data maps are some regulations. Not that the regulation is saying do a data map. They're like, where's your stuff? Like
Mhm,
what are you doing with stuff? And so in order to figure that out, they have to start mapping data. So
mhm,
I'm not what I'm not seeing is people see a regulation say, "Oh, let's start data mapping." I see them, get in trouble for stuff, and they're like, "Oh my god, where's this stuff? Where's Jasper? Who knew about all this stuff?" So they're really reacting to the fact that really they have a dual obligation now. So the obligation is not only to their customer in terms of a product or service, but also you have to be a good steward and be transparent about how you manage people's data. And so that's the
Mhm.
part that, some companies do it well, some others they don't do it as well. Let's say they're doing everything they're supposed to do. The fact that Minnesota said they have a data map, that may mean that they may not have to do anything more. Maybe they already have one, right? So I think what they're trying to say, if you don't understand your data, you need to find a way to understand it. So not to say that I think everybody has data maps, which I don't think they do. But I think especially companies that are trying to implement more emerging tech like artificial intelligence, it's hard to do that without doing that mapping. It's very hard to do.
While you were talking, I was thinking having a data map is sort of like organizing your pantry. Right? Like
Mhm.
you go in, you do it so you can figure out like how many cans of chickpeas you have left and if you need to get more. And you do it so you throw away all the stuff that's expired and that you don't need. And that if you were to use on accident, it could spoil your dinner, kind of a thing. And it's like, I always hear the perspective that as soon as you finish your data map, it's already obsolete. And while I like kind of understand that, it does feel a little bit more akin to organizing my pantry and that like I've got to do it pretty regularly to keep things fresh, but it's not as though I organize my pantry and immediately like it gets screwed up because I make dinner that night.
Oh, I love that analogy, right, and because I cook too, so I love that. I double love that analogy. But, you're right. So, like, yeah, so you use the 2 cans of chickpeas. That doesn't mean your whole pantry system is messed up, right? It just
Right.
means, "Oh, well, I have to update this." Just like you go to the grocery store, you make a list, right? And so
Yeah.
you're probably buying the same things all the time, right? So you're probably buying milk all the time. So, "Okay, I'm out of milk." So you're just updating that. You're not like, "Oh, let me do everything over." So
Right.
yeah. Right. So right, instead of I think a lot of people it's so funny because I saw some company, oh god, this was 1,000 years ago, but they had just gone bonkers on the data map thing. They just went way too far. And it's like, there's no way that you can update that, So just to your example, it wasn't just, oh, I need another 2 cans of chickpeas. It's like I bought, Goya chickpeas and the label is blue and it has, red beans on the side. It's like that's not necessary. That's not important. And that's another thing I would say about data mapping. Don't waste time on tracking things that are not going to be important in the future. Okay. So
Yeah.
an example of this is like, some people they're like your pantry example again. The chickpeas can was blue. It was blue. I wrote it down. The chickpeas. It was like that's not important. That's not going to be important in the future. The importance is that there were no chickpeas on this day, right?
Yeah.
Not that the can was blue. And so that's what I see people. Yeah,
This is going to be the analogy that never dies.
totally.
I can't wait
No,
for I'm gonna re I'm gonna read about it in your next installment, Debbie,
I
of your book.
know.
I'm
Oh
like,
my
"I know
God.
where that
This
came from."
is
Well, and just so you know, Angie goes through a lot of chickpeas because her daughter likes to eat chickpeas.
Yeah, my
I've
daughter just
witnessed
eats chickpeas raw, like, with her hands or her face. It doesn't really matter.
it.
She'll just stick her face in a bowl full of chickpeas and start eating them. She's
oh
not
my
the worst,
god.
right?
Yeah,
Uh,
totally.
so data mapping, though. Okay, so you're an organization and a regulator comes knocking after a breach or a complaint or something like that. How important is it that you can actually produce a credible data map? And does having one really, like, move the needle on anything, or is it more of a nice to have?
It's a nice to have because it's sort of like a blueprint for your organization to be able to take action, right? Even if you get in trouble with a regulator, they typically don't ask for your data map. They ask you, where is the data? Is it incumbent on you to figure out how to find your data? So, but how do you find it? You do mapping. So, yeah. So I think it's interesting that, like you said, Minnesota saying you like You have to have a data map, and maybe what they're saying is, okay, if we come knocking on your door, then you need to be able to show that you've done in the past that you were so diligent with your data that you started something. So I don't think that they're gonna be
Mhm.
like, "Oh, you didn't have a 3 you had 1 can of chickpeas instead of 2." They're not gonna be looking at it at that level. They just wanna see, like, are you doing something? Are you like, you can't say, like, "I don't know where anything is," "I tried nothing and I'm out of ideas." So that's what they don't want.
I dealt with a lot of regulator requests when I was in House Counsel, and probably 50% of them asked if we had a data map and a data dictionary, to which our answer was always, sort of.
Right.
I'm curious, Debbie, and thank you for, by the way, for walking us through the topic of data mapping, because I do think, like Angie was saying earlier, it is something that doesn't get talked about very often, and probably because everybody has like their own, idea of what it actually means. And there's also a wide variety of ways of doing this. And I think it's also an area of insecurity. It is like your pantry. Like, if you came over here to my pantry, I can tell you right now, I got expired spices somewhere in there. Like, I don't want people going through it. I could be embarrassed about what you find. So it's kind of one of those things people don't want to talk about. So anyway, I appreciate you taking the time to walk us through that. I'm curious what you think for the future when we look at privacy, data privacy in the next 5 years or so. What do you think that looks like?
That's a great question. Next 5 years, I'm hoping what it looks like is that companies can find a way to be more transparent about how they handle data and be more aware of the potential harm that can happen when they're based on how their data is handled. I'll give you an example. So there was an app called Strava, and it still
Oh my
exists.
god, I use them.
You Strava?
Uh-oh.
Okay. So Strava, well, don't get too upset right now. But a couple years ago, Strava, they had what's it called? A heat map? I can't remember what they called it, but the map is supposed to be, you can share your routes with people. That sounds cool, right? But what they found is that people were using it to stalk people. Like, like this,
Mm.
like I think a woman has stalked a guy to his house and all this stuff. And actually, the military stopped people from overseas using it because military members who would go running, the other side or the enemy will be tracking them, and they could actually kill them because it's like, oh, well, we know exactly where you're going to be because you're on this app or whatever. So Strava, they changed it so that now they don't track people's exact location to their house. And so I don't know exactly how they changed that, but that's one of the reasons why in the US now, which you probably have not even heard about, but the US has a thing where data brokers can't sell data to people outside the country. That is the concern that I have. So I'm sure Strava did not think when they were doing this, they're thinking, oh, this is a cool app and people who run together, they can kind of, you know,
Mhm.
coordinate. And that's great. But they weren't thinking about like the stalking part of it. They weren't thinking about the military part. And so I want to see companies, not just be excited about the innovation, but also think about the harm that could possibly happen. So I don't want people to be
Mhm.
harmed and then like, oh, let's do, Ryan's app, Ryan's law, because this bad thing happened to him from this app. So that's just an example of what I would like to see more companies think about.
Angie, you can't get away with anything, by the way, between your apps and your Aura Ring and all the stuff that you got going on. Like, you are not hiding
No, my
anywhere.
criminal career was DOA. Debbie, what do you think is the most underhyped thing that nobody is talking about really, but that they should be?
Underhyped thing. Well, let's see. Maybe something that people have heard of, or maybe don't know about, or maybe don't know about. Google has a thing that you can sign up for, and if your address or phone number shows up in a search engine, it will send you a report, and it'll let you can say, I don't want I want you to delete it, and then they give you a report back whether they approve it or not. So I thought that was kind of a little cool thing because you don't know. You have no clue. Basically, your data is being like duplicated all over the place. And It's
Mhm.
all over, and so it doesn't delete it from the source, like the website it came from. It just deletes it from the search engine. So if someone was looking on Google, then they wouldn't be able to find that information in that place, basically. So, yeah.
Hmm. I know that we have a wide variety of people who listen to our podcast. We've got students, we've got people in different types of vocations. Sometimes they're wanting to know, like, hey, I know that I've done eDiscovery, or I know I've done privacy, or I know I've done forensics, or whatever, and I want to try something new. If somebody's listening and they're like, man, Debbie is straight up most awesome diva I've ever listened to in my life. Like, I want to be like her when I grow up. What advice would you give to folks who kind of want to follow in your shadow or follow along the same steps that you've made in your career to be where you are today?
Yeah. One thing I would say is try to figure out what skills that you have that can be transferable to a different industry, right? So, like we're talking about data mapping right now. So, you can do a data map at any company. Has nothing to do with litigation, right? So that may be a skill. You can say, okay, I can do this thing, So I being able to translate your skill in technology now into other things that you want to do. I think this is like a great moment for that, especially around to me AI. The way people are using AI now, it wasn't, a lot of us are new to some of the ways that we're seeing technology being rolled out. And so you focusing on that in some way and merging that with your skill will make you a lot more valuable in whatever other career or path that you want to take.
I love that. Is there anything else that we haven't discussed that you want to share with our listeners today, like before we wrap up?
I feel like we covered quite a bit. I don't wanna make your show like another hour, but yeah, we could talk.
Well,
Okay.
folks, if we need to know more, I have a feeling people would love to hear you come back again. So,
Oh, that's so
um,
sweet.
it's been a pleasure to have you. And I know that you've mentioned a couple things. We know that you have a podcast. We know that you are an author. We know that you're an educator. If people want to get plugged into Data Diva's world, where would they go to find out more?
Yeah, probably the best place, the fastest place is go to LinkedIn, type in Data Diva Debbie Reynolds. My name should pop right up. And then my website, DebbieReynoldsConsulting.com. And then you can look at my podcast, the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast. It's on all the major podcast directories. I think it's on 18 of them now. So yeah, we just had over 1 million downloads, and yeah, I think we're in 160 countries now.
Oh
Wow.
my god.
One day we'll be like the diva, Angie.
We are not worthy.
I know.
Well, Debbie, I would just want to say, like, thank you so much for coming on the pod, for sharing all of your wisdom and your expertise with our listeners. This was so fun talking to you.
I feel a little starstruck, to be honest, too, because I've listened to you
Absolutely.
for years and I can't believe we're actually getting to talk to you. But I do want to personally thank you just from a woman's perspective. And also as a minority, to know that you have really been a trailblazer, and it's inspiring and it's empowering to watch you and to listen to you, and for you to be sharing your intellect with others to benefit others, and help us all grow as a community is an amazing gift that you've given us, and I am aware of that and I appreciate that. So thank you for being here and thank you for being you.
Oh, thank you. I guess I would say to anyone, like, don't hide your shine. Don't hide your shine. So you know the thing that you can do that nobody else can do, and don't hide that. So it's very important.
Amen, sister.
Absolutely. And if you don't know what your thing is, you can ask AI and it will
That's
probably
right.
tell you.
It'll tell you a lot. I'll tell you a lot of stuff. Yeah.
It will tell you a lot of things that you want to hear.
Totally.
All
Totally.
right. Well, that is all the time we have for today, folks. Thank you so much for joining us on eDiscovery Chicks. We hope you learned something new, felt empowered, or just had a little bit of fun. Join the flock by following us on LinkedIn and Instagram, and check out our website, eDiscoveryChicks.com. If you loved this episode, share it with your network, leave us a review, or tag us on our socials. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode.
Bye.
Bye.
The views we've expressed today are the eDiscovery Chicks views and don't necessarily represent the views of our employers, partners, or clients. The podcast is available solely for educational purposes to provide general information about eDiscovery principles and not to provide legal advice to any specific situation. It is not a substitute for legal advice from a lawyer you retained or who has agreed to represent you.